Aloha, welcome to another edition of Ka Pewa by Hawaii Community Foundation. I'm Kanoa Leahey, and today we're looking to understand a little bit more about the economic impacts of Maui County post-disaster. And to help me talk about this, we welcome Trey Gordner. He is a policy researcher and data scientist with UHERO. First off, Trey, aloha and mahalo for being part of Ka Pewa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about UHERO. Can you give us an overview of this organization, what it does, and its role in helping to shape policy discussions in Hawaii?
Sure. So UHERO stands for the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization. We're a group at the university, and our focus is rigorous, independent economic analysis of the big issues facing Hawaii. So we have a team of experts that work on things from housing to economic diversification, health, education, natural resources, and more. We're really trying to help policymakers think through these big issues, come up with potential options for them, and highlight any particular indicators that they need to be paying attention to.
Well, you've been at this and doing this type of work for a long time. Can you speak to the evolution as far as how widely accepted data research, data science, data gathering, how much more perhaps widely accepted it is here in this modern day?
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone with a phone knows that there's so much information coming at us every day, and that's just as true for decision makers in government, in business, in nonprofit leadership. And so, UHERO is, we see our role, we're sort of a sense-making organization. We're trying to absorb all this information and to translate it into actionable next steps.
So how does specifically UHERO research help to inform decision-making, particularly in times of what we're talking about, crisis and the aftermath and fallout of the Lahaina fires?
Sure. So I'll give an example that most people who are familiar with UHERO would be familiar with, which is our forecast reports. So every quarter, we come out with a new economic forecast, what we think is going to happen to Hawaii's economy at the state level and also for the individual counties. And so that includes our predictions for the next 2 years about things like unemployment rates, job growth, income growth, tourism, right, visitor spending and visitor arrivals and so forth. And so decision makers are using those kinds of forecasts to understand what may be coming down the pike and to adapt.
When you talk about those research categories, is it just a general sort of wide breadth approach? Are there categories within there that are more pronounced or prioritized, especially as it pertains to the recovery efforts on Maui?
Every kind of policy decision starts with what are our revenues and what are our expenses, right? And so on the revenue side, our forecasts and the additional policy research that we're doing are helping governments understand how much money will be available to deal with the problem. And then on the expenses side, we're helping them think through what are the additional investments that might need to be made in order to deal with this problem. And so for Maui in particular, a good deal of our research has had to do with the housing recovery.
Okay. Well, let's get into the particulars there, because we have been here in this cluster of episodes on Ka Pewa. We've been spotlighting Hawaii Community Foundation's House Maui initiative, the Maui Strong funds that have been dispersed to various organizations as well. And so last October, UHERO released its Maui Recovery Report on housing and jobs. What were some of those key findings? And I know that data is collected monthly, so have you seen changes in that data here over recent months?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we, as you said, we started this survey a year after the wildfires, and we were focused on those two areas specifically, housing and jobs. So on the housing side, we're collecting information about people's housing situations. Were they or were they not displaced? Are they in temporary housing, permanent housing? How long have they been at their current address? How much are they paying for rent? Is it more or less than what they paid before the fires? And then on the job side, we're looking at, did you lose your job as a result, or your business as a result of the fires? Have you found another job? Is that job equal or worse or better in terms of pay, in terms of hours, in terms of predictability? And for your family as a whole, are you above the poverty line or have you fallen below the poverty line? So we've looked at before the wildfires and since the wildfires. And as you say, we've been updating on a monthly basis ever since.
So what are you finding? What is sort of the general sense as far as what you are uncovering with this data?
Yeah, we have uncovered many economic hardships, I would say, for fire-affected households.
So fairly dire, perhaps, the image that's painted?
Yeah, the way that we describe it on the housing side is a vice, the housing vice. And what we mean by that is people are paying significantly more in rent than they paid before the wildfires, and they're receiving less in housing, right? So they have fewer bedrooms. So more rent for fewer bedrooms. They're sort of being squeezed from both sides. We've seen people report that they're living more often in crowded conditions, more often with friends and family, more often in situations that are untenable in the long run. And for that, paying originally about 40% more. People were reporting that they were paying 40% more in rent than they were before the fires. And that scales up even more for larger houses. So if you owned a studio, or excuse me, if you were living in a studio or a one bedroom beforehand, you're probably going to be able to find a studio or a one bedroom, but you're going to be paying 20, 30% more than you were before the fires. If you were living in a 3+ bedroom house, you could be spending 80 or 90% more, almost double what you were paying beforehand. And it's going to be very hard to find and stay in a home like that. There just aren't that many left on the market.
It's not surprising to hear that any kind of data research would result in the idea of housing is too expensive for the average person here in Hawaii. But is there any aspect of this data in particular that comes as any kind of surprise to you or is of particular alarm?
We were surprised to find that based on our definition of fire-affected households, we had two kinds, right? So many of the official statistics are focused on the people who were directly displaced by the fires, right? The people who lost the place where they lived in the fires. And for our survey, we actually opened the aperture a bit to what we called fire-affected families or fire-affected households. And so that doesn't just include people who lost a home in the fires. It also includes people who lost a business or their job, but may not have lived in the burn area. And so the really surprising finding for us there was that for this fire-affected definition, people who lost a job or a business in the fires, 1 in 3 were also displaced from their homes, right? So this was sort of a hidden reality of the housing market on Maui before we started conducting our survey.
So how does this now go from research and data points that you have put together that continually change month to month as you collect this information? How does this then get put into the hands of policymakers to help shape a policy? Because obviously we're seeing significant housing challenges here. Based on your research, what would be the most critical levers for policymakers to pull to try to stimulate a healthy recovery here as best as possible?
Yeah, so as far as how this gets in the hand of policymakers, we wrote a report to start with. We also created an interactive online dashboard that we're updating on a regular basis with those additional months of data. And so policymakers and the general public, reporters, others who are interested in what we're finding can go on our website and look for the Maui Recovery Dashboard. Now, as far as the levers to pull and how the data is actually being used, the first way is just to really level set in policymakers' minds and to watch the trend over time. And so most of what I described, the trend is fairly level since we started tracking back in August. What is different is that it does seem like there's a little bit more housing stability, that people were saying that they had moved in the last 3 months or moved in the last 6 months. That proportion is falling. So more people are in more stable housing than they were beforehand. But we hope to present this information on an ongoing basis so policymakers can make changes in the real world and find out whether or not they're having the effect that they intend to have.
As someone who takes an objective view here towards your research, how difficult is that sometimes to avoid the personal and emotional investment into some of this stuff as you comb through it and as you continue to formulate some of these images and some of this framework?
it can be really hard, and there's something unsatisfying, I think, about writing a report that says something like, 20% of fire-affected families are in poverty now. There's something unsatisfying about just that bullet point or just that number, because it's such a weak way to it's accurate, but it's such an incomplete way to describe what families are experiencing on the ground. Similarly, UHERO doesn't just do the housing and jobs survey. We have a couple of other policy analyses in the works as well. And one of the other ones is the Maui wildfire exposure study. We're doing this in partnership with JABSOM, with the School of Medicine, and following people who were exposed to the wildfire smoke and so forth for the next 10 years, and observing their physical and mental well-being over time, acute conditions that arise, and also what the wildfire will do to their chronic conditions. And there's something incomplete or unsatisfactory about those kinds of studies, even if they're true. And so we intend to be a supplement for policy research, a supplement for policymakers in their decision making, but not a substitute for going in among the community, speaking to people, and understanding their needs.
Is there an understanding, is there an inclusion in your mind, at the very least, regarding precedent? Do you know of other regions and other places that have faced similar crises, and are there lessons that you believe can be learned from them?
Yeah, we've spent some time looking at two others in particular. The one is Hurricane Katrina, and the other one is the camp fires that affected Paradise, California, back in, I believe, 2019. So Hurricane Katrina is sort of just a broader case study of disaster recovery, but we think it's important to Lahaina because some of the things that they found there were, over time, housing unaffordability, right? The same thing we're seeing on Maui was an issue throughout the New Orleans area, and really didn't get better until they started rebuilding at good speed. But also, individual owners in areas that were wiped out or affected, often, even if they wanted to move back and rebuild, they didn't have the money to do so, right? So maybe they were underinsured, maybe the insurance came, but by the time they were able to start rebuilding, prices had spiked to such a level that they could no longer afford it. And so New Orleans ended up with these sort of incomplete communities, this patchwork of restored areas, and that had consequences for the people who returned to live there. So from New Orleans, I think the lessons are to really talk to the property owners, the people who live there, to really understand their plans and where they might be having difficulties rebuilding.
So housing included, but perhaps even beyond housing. What is your current outlook for the economic status of Maui County? And are there emerging trends? Is there anything from your studies that would lead you to a position of optimism or hope amidst all of this?
Well, I think optimism and hope are important. And, one thing that I'll say is no one is arguing that that Lahaina won't recover, that West Maui won't recover. It's pretty clear that communities exist for a reason, and the people who are displaced are very, very eager to rebuild, and policymakers are very supportive of that goal. And so really, for a group like UHERO thinking about this, it's just a question of a speedy and equitable recovery, right? Making sure that everyone is included and make sure that we're rebuilding as fast as we can. In the case of some other places, like the Paradise wildfires, for instance, there were people who were permanently displaced, and it's taken a very long time for Paradise to even recover to a little over half of the population that they were at beforehand. And so that's the way we think about it. There's certainly cause for optimism. It's a great community that's very excited about coming back and about the possibilities of rebuilding. And it's a community that retains strong ties, even though it's been, far flung into other parts of Maui and beyond.
What led you into this field, and where do you extract your reward from your work?
I was a civil servant for a while, and I was an entrepreneur for a while. So if we step back, kind of the timeline for me was I was a business student. I joined startups. I thought that was the way to change the world. And then I started my own company, but tellingly, I wasn't interested in going off and making a ton of money or something. I started a company working for public libraries, helping public libraries to connect with their communities again. And through the course of that, I started working with some amazing civil servants who I thought were doing great things and under unbelievable pressure and constraints. And I just got interested in government. So I went back to school for urban planning, became a public servant, a civil servant, did that for a couple of years. And I really felt like it's great to be a public servant, right? But you don't always have all the tools that you need. And especially when a disaster happens, right? You have to make a lot of important decisions very quickly on very little information. And I thought, how great would it be if we could have people who were thinking about these kinds of issues in advance. We're pulling in the best information in the world from other jurisdictions who had experienced the same thing, from the academic literature, right? The best research available on how to deal with these issues. And I discovered there was such a place in Hawaii, and that was UHERO. And so Carl, our executive director, kind of found me in a housing advocacy role, encouraged me to join, and it's been a great experience. I'm really honored by what I do, and the reward, I think, is seeing the ideas that we come up with taken seriously, to see some of them implemented, and to believe that is resulting in better communities for all of us.
It seems to me that the more information that is available, the better it is for any kind of decision-making process at any level. Is there, though, in a general sense, is there some resistance? Are there certain people in positions of policymaking that are less enthusiastic about accepting some of the research that you do?
The sort of abstract best answer in a technical or mathematical sense is not always the practical one or the one that's achievable in the current environment. And so we don't see it as UHERO's role to actually make the decisions in any way. We want to present some very clear-cut and vetted options that are going to result in a better future.
That requires a lot of trust on your part, right?
Yeah.
Like hoping that it is utilized in the most productive way.
It can, yes, but we do have a close working relationship with many of our policymakers. They have the same interests that we do, right? They want a better, more prosperous state that includes more people in that prosperity. So in many cases, I don't find that policymakers are necessarily resistant or intransigent in any way. They just have a different view of the world, right? Where our view is, what makes the most sense given other people's experience and the academic research. Policymakers solving for different and more problems, right? They're thinking what makes the most sense for my community, for the legitimate interests that exist in our community, and how can we bring everyone at the table to get something passed in a way that the entire, that the majority of people can support.
Since the fires, what areas of research have you focused on the most?
So UHERO has completed 3 studies so far with respect to the Maui wildfires. The first is the Maui wildfire exposure study, and this is looking at people's physical and mental health who were exposed to the wildfires. We've completed the first part, written a report about it, but this will actually be ongoing for the next 10 years. We'll be looking at it in partnership with the School of Medicine. The 2 others are in partnership with the Hawaii Community Foundation. The first is our Maui Recovery Survey, Housing and Jobs, on a monthly basis since 1 year after the wildfires. We've been looking at people's outcomes in terms of income, employment, poverty rates on the job side, and then on the housing side, rents, how often they've had to move, what kind of conditions they're living in, and so forth. And then the third and final one is a study of the what's sometimes called the Minatoya list. This is the mayor's proposal to phase out transient vacation rentals in apartment districts with the idea to make them available for long-term housing.
So this is a long game. This is going to be something that you are going to be focused on for quite some time.
Yes, we're in this for the long haul, and we have great extramural funding and partnerships in order to make that possible.
What policy shifts and investments could possibly make the greatest impact?
The most important thing we could do in West Maui right now is to accelerate long-term housing development. So we've seen from other places that have had wildfires or other major disasters that it's the pace of development that has the biggest effect on issues like outmigration. And so, for West Maui, it's important and very helpful to have temporary housing, things like the steps that FEMA and the state have taken. But ultimately, the only way that we get back to normal or even improve upon the difficult housing conditions that were there beforehand is to add more permanent housing units.
As for the overall current economic outlook of Maui County, are there emerging trends in what you've seen that signal either optimism or concern? Where do you see that falling?
Yeah, so there are many areas for optimism, but we do see a couple of areas for concern. The first is that it's not only the people who were displaced who are suffering some of these difficult economic outcomes, right? Things like the unemployment rate or job losses and so forth. They can happen to anyone on Maui, but most of the recovery programs are targeted to the people who were displaced. And so, one of the things that we think needs to be done is to sort of open up some of the possible charity funding and other sorts of programs to benefit people who weren't necessarily directly impacted by the fire, but who may have been indirectly impacted.
So it's more expansive than even what people would assume as far as the amount of the community on Maui that have felt the effects in the fallout of the fires is what you're saying.
That's right. And in our survey in the most recent months, what we're seeing is that the amount of people who are reporting receiving assistance from any source is declining rapidly, particularly in some of the government programs. So, for example, the overall statistic is something like 1 in 3 report that they've received no assistance from any source in the past month in the latest numbers. But it's particularly declining in some of the emergency disaster programs like additional food stamps and unemployment benefits. Those are really tapering off relative to where they were. That doesn't mean the need is tapering off, right? Only that some of these programs are winding down or running out of eligibility for people.
I like to, on Ka Pewa, give my interview subjects the floor. Just if there's anything you wanted to add, or anything that you feel like is important, something that maybe we didn't touch on, or something that means something to you that you just wanted to put out there.
I would say I have been working at UHERO for less than a year. And one of the things that surprises me most about the organization, even now, is just how much thinking has already been done on so many different fronts. And so, every couple of weeks when I'm looking around at the UHERO website, I discover some report or some brief from years ago on some issue that has come up once again, and I have a ready-made place to start, right? And so, there are questions around things like the empty homes tax, for example, things like economic diversification. We've been writing about these issues, not me personally, but we in a UHERO sense, right? Researchers and faculty members at UHERO have been thinking about economic diversification, for example, for a long, long time. And there are great ideas nested in reports from 5 and 10 and 15 years ago. And so I encourage people who are interested in these issues, interested in understanding not only disaster recovery, but just more about Hawaii's economy, the way things work, and the possibilities, the way they could work, to visit our website, uhero.hawaii.edu, for more information.
Well, that's great, Trey, and I really, really do appreciate you making the time to be here. Mahalo for being on Ka Pewa.
Mahalo for having me.